Welcome back to Yelling. I'm Matt Ryan, and look, we all know Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather is a dumb idea. Like a dumb idea. But this is America, and if there's anything that Americans like more than violence, class warfare, or feeling morally superior to other people, it's a dumb idea. So I got to thinking, and I consulted the Yelling Laboratory, and we've come up with a list. Here are 10 fights that are dumber than Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather. Number 10, Canelo Alvarez versus Rocky Fielding. Wait a minute. This is an actual boxing match between two world-class boxers inside Madison Square motherfucking Garden. How can this be on the list? Well, my sweet summer children, this fight had no business taking place. First and foremost, Canelo Alvarez's brother was kidnapped the week of the fight. In 2018, the Monday before the fight, I was always on the phone. I negotiated everything for his release. Alvarez said in an interview with Graham Bissinger a week before, he basically concaved the face of Billy Joe Saunders on DAZN. For 3 days, I negotiated with the kidnappers to get them to release him. So in the midst of all that, the whole saving your brother thing, he had to move up to super middleweight after 2 straight wars with Gennady Golovkin, and also go through all the bullshit of a fight week while carrying the biggest contract in the history of sports. I don't know how anybody could be focused on making weight, making all of your commitments, and planning for a fight inside Madison Square Garden. And then the fight happened. Canelo just beat this unassuming Englishman within an inch of his life in front of God and everybody in just 3 rounds. And by the way, he won with a godly body shot. Now take a look at these facts. Alvarez landed 72 of 141 punches, 35 of which were to the body. Now, that level of body punching was just 2 punches less than Fielding's entire output in those 3 rounds. So yeah, that belonged on the damn list. Number 9, Dominic Breazeale versus Deontay Wilder. And next up is another fight you'd be surprised to see on this list, WBC World Heavyweight title fight. But this one would go down in infamy, mainly because a man nearly got memed out of an entire sport. 8 months after Anthony Joshua dusted up Dom Breazeale in Joshua's first defense of his IBF world title, the former United States Olympian looked for a redemption win against Polish boxer Izu Ugona inside the Legacy Arena in Birmingham, Alabama, the hometown of then WBC World Heavyweight Champion and headliner of that card, Deontay Wilder. Wilder was putting his title up on the line in the main event of that show, which aired on Fox, against Gerald Washington. Allegedly, Breazeale and Deontay Wilder's brother, who's also a boxer, got in a dust-up while Wilder was in the ring dusting up Gerald Washington. And later on that night, allegedly, after both of these guys made it back to their hotel, a full-blown fracas broke out inside the Westin Birmingham. And this is what Breazeale claims. Breazeale claims that Wilder and his crew jumped the Olympian in front of his wife and kids. Well, it was kind of a thing between you guys back and forth for a few years, but you fast forward 2 years, 2 wins, and a Tyson Fury draw later, and Wilder needs an opponent because his team and Tyson Fury's new team at Top Rank are negotiating a highly anticipated rematch for that WBC World Heavyweight title, and it also happens that Dominic Breazeale is the mandatory opponent for Wilder and the WBC World Heavyweight title because of a win he had against Eric Molina. So this became a fight, and honestly, it shouldn't have been, because I was there at that press conference to announce the fight, and it was unsettling. Because Wilder is Deontay Wilder. If you've ever watched a Deontay Wilder fight press conference interview, you know who he is. And Breazeale is not that guy. He's not someone who can match that same level of intensity that Deontay Wilder did, and he tried. He feigned it and tried to talk some beat, but it really wasn't landing. And this is also around the time where Deontay Wilder said he wanted to catch a body in the ring, and for those who don't know what that means, catching a body means he wanted to actively murder his opponent. And that opponent was Dominic Breazeale. So, this is not a good thing for a guy whose only other heavyweight title fight was him getting stopped by an equally talented fighter in Anthony Joshua. Nobody expected a murder. You could feel that Breazeale was uncomfortable in that spotlight and just obviously didn't have the same mentality that Wilder had. And Deontay Wilder, for the first time since Mike Tyson, had some real momentum as a young, up-and-coming heavyweight. And then the bell rang inside the Barclays Center. It took less time for Wilder to knock out Breazeale than for me to explain the lore of this fight. That's the problem. The dude got his clock, watch, and entire soul cleaned in under 42 seconds. He had his soul punched out through his body, sent into the solar system, pulled back, and crumpled like a piece of paper upon re-entry. This fight shouldn't have happened. By no stretch of the imagination, this fight shouldn't have happened. For Wilder, this was his last win until he lost to Tyson Fury, who happened to concave his eardrum at the end of 2019. For Breazeale, he needed 21 months to recover from that loss to Wilder amidst the coronavirus pandemic, just to get walloped by former Fury opponent Otto Wallin in February of 2021. This was a terrible idea, but the memes kept this fight out of the top 5. Number 8, James Toney versus Randy Couture. 13 years after the first UFC event where we saw a boxer with one glove take on Hoyce Gracie, more on that later, we got another boxer versus mixed martial artist inside the octagon. This time it was former world heavyweight champion and a dude who allegedly fought Deion Sanders at training camp. Allegedly, James Toney. Toney, coming off of wins over vaunted opponents like Matthew Greer and Frezo Quendo, talked that shit about mixed martial arts to get the one thing that we all want. Those sweet, sweet, sweet pay-per-view dollars. And for Toney, who defeated an over-the-hill Evander Holyfield and Liddell Booker for the IBA heavyweight title 7 years prior, was looking for a second life inside the octagon. While I respect Toney for pulling a scam here and trying to make a lot of money, he should have gone for what we in the mixed martial arts profession call a Greg Hardy, where you fight nothing but Glass Joes and Boxcar Bobs until you make as much money that you possibly can make. But instead, James Toney called out the top UFC stars, including Chuck Liddell, I believe Tito Ortiz, and Randy Couture. And then, for whatever reason, James Toney was signed to a multi-fight deal with the UFC. When put on the spot about signing Toney, UFC President Dana White said,
"I have no idea. We did this deal, and now I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with him, and how I'm gonna do this thing. To be honest, I don't know why I did it. There's been this whole boxing versus mixed martial arts thing forever."
Now, has Dana White said that about everybody he signed off the Contender Series? Yes, but if you're signing an over-the-hill former heavyweight champion boxer to a multi-fight deal and have no idea what to do with them, what are you doing here? And then, instead of setting Toney up for a bigger pay-per-view fight down the road, they just said f*** it and booked him against Randy Couture. That's right, Captain America, a man with a contentious relationship against Dana White that's in its own list, in its own video, somewhere on the internet. And we'll probably make one later because we're culture vultures. I'll just say it right here, right now. I'm a whore. He was the man that was going to stand up for the sport that he was a world champion in and a Hall of Famer of the company he was fighting for. Couture was supposed to fight Rich Franklin at UFC 115, but Franklin got Chuck Liddell after Liddell's initial opponent, Tito Ortiz, got pulled from the fight due to injury. So now Toney was going to be sacrificed to Chuck Liddell. With Mario Yamasaki as the referee, you already knew this was a clown show before the introductions were done. And just 15 seconds into the fight, Couture takes Toney down with the easiest single leg takedown in the history of mixed martial arts. From there, a 50-second submission attempt from Couture, from where at one point, he tells the referee / passing observer of Life Society and the fights he referees, Yamasaki, that Toney said he gives. Now, whether or not that was true, Couture was lying, or Toney was denying it because he didn't want to come across like a beep, because that's a thing, I guess, is anybody's guess. But the fight continued. And then just a few seconds later, Couture reapplies the submission and Toney taps on the mat cleanly. But the lesson Dana White learned here was,
the UFC won't be doing any more boxing.
And I think that's true because Zuffa Boxing will happen at the same time Dana decides to pay everybody what they're worth. Number 7, Art Jemmerson versus Hoyce Gracie. Speaking of boxing, our number 7 entry takes us all the way back to UFC 1. That's right, UFC 1, the genesis of mixed martial arts that took place inside the McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, Colorado. Journeyman boxer and a man who had won Golden Gloves nationally a decade prior, Art Jemmerson walked into the octagon against the smallest member of the Gracie family, Hoyce. Now, whether or not Hoyce was chosen because of his size, to prove the Gracie ideology, maybe an internal strife within the family, or the Occam's razor reason that family's champion Hickson wanted more money, it's up for debate, but Hoyce was the guy walking in there and Jemmerson was the guy that was going up against him. This fight had enhancement match written all over it. Jemmerson had already fought 5 times in 1993, which is a lot for a boxer. And he went up against opponents such as Mike Shane Mooney Smith, Larry Prater, and my new favorite boxer, Lopez McGee, while he walked into the cage in his full boxing regalia, just with one glove on. Now, why did he do that? In an interview with Michael Stetz that appeared in MMA Mania, Campbell McLaren, the co-founder of the UFC, kind of broke it down as something that happened in a conversation between Jemmerson and Big John McCarthy. It seems Big John told Jemmerson that, you know what he's going to do to you in there, McLaren said in the interview. Jemmerson asked, what's he going to do? And he was dancing around and doing boxing moves. McCarthy said, you ever get in a clinch in a boxing match? Jemmerson said, yeah, the ref breaks it up. Big John goes, in this, they're not going to break it up. When he grabs you, he's going to have his arms on you. They're not going to break it up. The ref doesn't break it in this fight. Jemmerson went, what? Big John said he's going to shoot in, he's going to grab you, you're going to get one chance to hit him, and if you miss, he's going to be all over you. Jemmerson said, he's going to break my arm, isn't he? Big John said, yeah, he's going to break your arm. That's why he decided to wear one glove, McLaren revealed, to make sure we could see him tapping with his other hand. Walking with him to the octagon, he said, if I tap with my glove hand, is it still a tap? That's when I knew it wasn't going to work out. So Jemmerson got mind feed before the fight even started. Putting the one glove on, Hoyce shot him into a takedown, and just moments later, Jemmerson was the first victim of the Gracies inside the UFC octagon. Number 6, Jake Paul versus Nate Robinson. Yeah, this had to be on the list, just because it was a freak fight of the highest regard. Nate Robinson, all 5'9" of them, went up against Jake Paul of the It's Everyday Bro fame, as one searched for a bag and maybe some Twitter revenge, it's not really clear to me, while the other one searched for relevancy in a sport that he wanted to be in, and also an attempt to turn themselves from an internet pariah into an internet pariah. This fight was dumb at every single point of it. Like, every single aspect of this fight was dumb. It being on the undercard of the Roy Jones Jr. Mike Tyson fight, dumb. The fact that it was the co-main event, dumb. The fact that somehow both of these guys were in the same weight class, also dumb. Like, it broke my brain as a fight, and then, well, it broke Nate Robinson's brain in the process. Everyone was rooting for Nate Robinson, because come on, he was a great Nick, he made the dunk contest cool again, And Jake Paul. It's Jake Paul. It's Jake Paul. I don't care who it was. It could have been my mother in there. I would root for my mother to knock out Jake Paul, and I hate my mother. Robinson lasted 2 rounds against Paul, which, not that bad considering the fact that Paul was 4 inches taller and had way more experience than Robinson, who had only started boxing that August, and it was November. But now we have to deal with Jake Paul as a combat sports star and the fighters' rights activist that we didn't want, but we deserve? Number 5, Dos Caras Jr. versus Mirko Cro Cop. Oh boy, this guy is on my list twice. No, not Cro Cop. I met Cro Cop once, and the fear that was instilled in me in that day was nearly the same amount of fear that Mauro Ranallo had instilled in him 18 years prior. Now, Mirko Cro Cop in Pride Fighting Championship was a god. His right leg was called the hospital, his left leg was called the cemetery, because if he hit you with one of those kicks to the head, that is where you were going. And then you have Alberto El Patron, aka Alberto Del Rio, aka Dos Caras Jr., who started wrestling for AAA, the biggest wrestling company in his native Mexico, after representing Mexico in the 2000 Olympics. About a year later, he would begin having a hobby of also fighting MMA fights. After a real spotty 3-2 start in a company called Deep Impact. God, I miss old school MMA company names. They're just, come on. Deep Impact? Who doesn't want to watch Deep Impact as a fight? It's a Morgan Freeman movie, for God's sake. Alberto, who was working and fighting under the name Dos Caras Jr., including with his lucha mask on, would sign up to fight for Pride, who at the time was the biggest MMA promotion in the world, not only in talent, but also in freak fights. Now, in the grand tradition of a freak fight, Dos Caras Jr. would face a man whose nickname was derived from his work as a combat policeman in Croatia. Cro Cop. Get it? Don't tell Cro Cop I made light of this. Don't you dare tell Cro Cop I made light of this. I like living, God. After fellow pro wrestlers Kazuyuki Fujita twice, Yuji Nagata, and founder of Hustle and the UWF mother I Nobuhiko Takada were sacrificed at the altar of Cro Cop, along with the Gracie Hunter, Kazuchi Sakuraba, a draw against Vanderlei Silva, a TKO of Heath Herring, and a straight-up knockout of Igor Vovchanchyn. Dos Caras Jr. was up next, obviously. Cro Cop did it on Dos Caras Jr.'s entire existence with a left head kick in the corner that you could hear 5 blocks away from the venue, and then a right uppercut to a crumpled Dos Caras Jr. that just put a bow on the entire occasion. This was a freak fight for the ages, and such a terrible idea for the lucha star that it barely falls short of his other addition on the list. Like, barely. Number 4, Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz 1. Anthony Joshua. Now, he may not be my favorite of heavyweight boxing's big 3, but I love watching this dude fight. He's the prototype of what you want in a modern heavyweight champion. He has an Olympic pedigree, the ability to represent vast cross-sections of society, he's handsome, and he can murder an opponent with his power. Then the Andy Ruiz fight happened. Now, Joshua was set to fight Jarrell Miller from the ancestral home of yelling, Brooklyn, New York, BK stand up. But at the initial press conference for the fight, it was a sheep show. Cops were there. Miller needed to be physically removed from the venue. I think Miller's mom also got involved. As a member of the press, this was exactly what you want from a heavyweight title press conference. And on the scale of, let's say, a picnic at Central Park and the Malice at the Palace, this was like one rung below the Mike Tyson-Lennox Lewis press conference, where Lennox Lewis got bit and Mike Tyson really wanted to kill Lennox Lewis. And then, a month before the fight, obviously, Miller tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs and was pulled from the fight. But then Matchroom Boxing promoter and the man most likely to be voted a James Bond lookalike or a Bond villain lookalike, Eddie Hearn, went into the recycling bin of U.S. heavyweight boxers and grabbed Andy Ruiz Jr. Ruiz Jr. had been a consistent and fairly dominant fighter to start his career, winning his first 29 pro fights by knockout or TKO and one unanimous decision, until he fought then WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker in 2016. Parker, who was fighting in his native New Zealand with the WBO crown on the line, ended up on the good side of a majority decision win over Ruiz, who looked to be winning the fight. Ruiz would step in at the last minute, fresh off of a 5th round stoppage of Alexander Dmitrienko in April of 2019, which meant that he was already in peak condition and could just focus on game plan, while Joshua still needed to get ready and also game plan for a completely different style of fighter. So Ruiz, who represents not only Mexican and Mexican Americans, but also every fat motherfucker with a dream like your humble narrator, is facing Anthony Joshua, the emperor of heavyweight boxing, inside Madison Square Garden with a month's notice when Joshua was preparing for a completely different opponent. Depending how you feel about this, you can see this going 2 different ways. Ruiz Joshua being the real-life version of Homer Simpson and Dredrick Tatum, or real-life Rocky 2. Not Rocky, because Rocky lost in Rocky. If you guessed option 2, then you guessed correctly. And allegedly concussed Joshua, who a few hours before had his father nearly fighting Eddie Hearn over his son's inability to fight, would look not so great early on against an invigorated and focused Ruiz, who was looking to win the title that Parker and New Zealand denied him 3 years ago, along with the other titles that Joshua held as unified champion. For 7 rounds, Ruiz outclassed one of the best boxers in the sport, who looked like he was melting down in front of a worldwide audience inside the sport's most hallowed venue. And then it was over. Ruiz had dropped Joshua for the final time, and sitting inside Madison Square Garden on the Sky Bridge, you can feel the layers of emotion releasing from the crowd. It was like a wake, funeral, baptism, birthday party, and the start and end of Prohibition all in one moment. The press, we were flabbergasted. Latino and Mexican fans in the audience were over the moon, and British and UK fans who traveled across the ocean to see their hero were downtrodden, but happy for the new champion. The only time I really felt that same kind of energy inside Madison Square Garden was when John Cena returned at the 2008 Royal Rumble. The sudden Pavlovian reaction to what's happening and then immediately realizing this is what the world is like now. That's a powerful thing, and that's one of the purest emotions in life and in sports. Number 3, Floyd Mayweather versus Tenshin Nasukawa. Floyd Mayweather and Ryzen, aka the non-union equivalent to Mike Tyson and Pride. In 2018, Floyd Mayweather announced that he and the spiritual successor to Pride had come to an agreement that he was going to compete for the promotion. Then a few hours and a plane ride later, Mayweather said that it wasn't going to happen because he was supposed to be fighting not a mixed rules fight, which was what initially was announced, but a exhibition in front of a small group of wealthy fans. But then after a few million more were put in Mayweather's bank account, the fight was back on, but this time it was an exhibition. And by exhibition, we mean there were no judges, and if either fighter was knocked out or stopped, or the fight went to the scorecards that were non-existent because there were no judges, there was no winner and no loser. It was masturbatory. Straight up masturbatory. Mayweather would whoop this child's ass to the point where after a 3rd knockdown to Nasukawa, his corner threw in the towel and Nasukawa started crying and saying in a later interview that he didn't deserve to fight Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather didn't deserve $9 million, but he kept it, so, it's okay, chin up, kid, and, Mayweather got to keep those cool green gloves, so, not a terrible waste. Number 2, Alberto El Patron versus Tito Ortiz. Alberto is back, but not in pog form. This time, nearly 20 years after Crow Cop kicked the shit out of him and he was run out of the WWE and Impact Wrestling respectively, Alberto El Patron returned to mixed martial arts, fighting for Combate America, the promotion created by former UFC co-creator Campbell McLaren. McLaren would make Alberto the figurehead president in 2016 after Alberto's second stint with the WWE. And, well, he would hint the entire time that he would want to go back in the cage one more time. Meanwhile, Tito Ortiz was back on the market because Golden Boy MMA went the way of the Hindenburg. And then these two would obviously sign for a fight against one another at the end of 2019 in a Texas border town. because duh, marketing. Now, I interviewed both of these guys and also covered this live for MMA Mania. Why would I go interview both of these guys at MMA Mania World Headquarters? Easy answer is, I love freak fights. I love weird that shouldn't and never happen if there were a cosmic being nudging things towards the idea of sanity. Also, because it could, and it was fun, if not a bit exhausting. And then Real American played. That's right, Tito Ortiz walked out to the cage to the Rick Derringer hit, Real American. So let's take a look at this. It was Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda, Hulk Hogan, and Tito Ortiz, who walked out to Real American. And also Mr. America, but we all know who that was. That's right, you guessed it, Frank Stallone. It was a great troll, but it wasn't a great fight. Tito would dust Alberto and take possession of his WWE Championship. That's right, he took his WWE Championship. I forgot to mention this was a title for title fight, like a legit title for title fight, like they were fighting for pink slips. So if Alberto won, he would get Tito's UFC light heavyweight title. While when Tito won, he got Alberto's WWE Championship that he won while he was in the WWE. It's real, it happened. You could see this photo of my stupid ass in between both belts like I'm at a fan convention. This was a thing that happened. But it shouldn't have. But much like Tito Ortiz's political career and being the mayor pro tem of Huntington Beach, it did, and we're the worse for it. Number 1, Tito Ortiz versus Chuck Liddell. And away we go. How could this not be number 1? Like, all of it. Golden Boy MMA makes Yama pit fighting and X-Arm seem like God's gift to combat sports. In an attempt to piss Dana White off for floating the idea of Zuffa boxing, Oscar De La Hoya would announce a new MMA promotion with a card that would be headlined by one of the biggest rivalries in sports, Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell. Everybody in the combat sports community kind of knew Chuck was going to get smoked. We didn't want to say it out loud, or when we did say it, it was through pursed lips and gritted teeth. At 48 years old, Liddell was walking around like he got hit with a 9-iron in the hips and knees. He just wasn't right. When the fight started, everybody held their breath, and then much like a lawn chair in a strong breeze, Chuck was sent back into retirement and to referee an Aaron Carter and Lamar Odom fight, promoted by the brother of the bare knuckle guy. It was depressing. That was the first edition of 10 Worst. If you liked it, let us know in the comments below, and watch Yelling beginning Bobby Bonilla Day, aka July 1st.